Yo, this might be one of the most confusing celebrity meltdowns we've seen in a minute. What was supposed to be a simple, harmless throwback story somehow turned into a full-blown internet explosion, and now everybody's asking the same question. What did Ray J actually hear? Because when Camron and Mase spoke on Brandy, it didn't sound disrespectful. It didn't sound messy. It honestly sounded like two legends just laughing about old times. But somehow, that turned into threats, wild accusations, and one of the most chaotic rants we've seen in a while. And here's where it gets even crazier. The more Ray J talked, the less it made sense. It wasn't just anger, it felt personal, emotional. Like something deeper was bubbling under the surface that nobody else could see. Meanwhile, the internet is replaying the original clip over and over, trying to figure out where things went wrong. And most people are coming to the same conclusion. This reaction doesn't match the situation. So now the real question isn't just about what was said. It's about why it triggered such a powerful response. Did Ray J take things too far? Or is there something behind the scenes that we're not seeing yet? Because one thing is clear. This situation escalated fast, and it's far from over. So let's really break this down step by step, because the way this situation escalated, it didn't just happen out of nowhere, but at the same time, it kinda did. Everything started when Camron and Mase were having a regular conversation, nothing out of the ordinary. Just two veterans in the game talking about their past, sharing stories like they've done 100 times before. And then the topic shifted to Brandy. Now, the way they brought her up wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't messy. It wasn't even controversial in the moment. It actually came off more like a nostalgic, almost playful memory from back in the day. They described it like a friendly competition. Mase basically painted the picture like he was already that guy at the time, established, in position, moving quietly. Meanwhile, Camron described himself as the young one coming up, hungry, trying to step into that same spotlight. The comparison they used? It said everything. Shaq and Kobe. One already dominant. One rising fast. And in that context, it wasn't even about Brandy in a negative way. It was more about timing, status, and where they both stood in that moment of their lives. There was laughter. There was joking. There was no tension. And most importantly, there was no disrespect. That's why what happened next caught everybody off guard. Because somehow, that exact same conversation reached Ray J, and instead of seeing it for what it was, he reacted like it was something completely different. Now here's where things start to shift. At first, people thought maybe he just misunderstood it. Maybe he heard a clipped version. Maybe something got taken out of context. Maybe someone explained it to him the wrong way. Because the reaction that followed? It didn't match the tone of the original conversation at all. Not even close. Instead of brushing it off or even addressing it calmly, Ray J came in with energy that felt intense right from the start. And not just intense, but scattered. He wasn't just responding, he was going off. He started calling people out, making threats, throwing out statements that felt way bigger than the situation itself. And the more he talked, the more it felt like the situation was slipping further away from the original topic. It wasn't just about what Cam and Mase said anymore. It turned into something else entirely. And that's when people really started paying attention. Because when you actually listen closely to what Ray J was saying, it didn't feel like someone responding to a simple story. It felt like someone reacting emotionally. Like something deeper had been triggered. At one point, he made it very clear that his issue was about his sister. About protecting Brandy and making sure nobody spoke on her name in a way he didn't approve of. And on the surface, that part makes sense. Anybody would understand defending family. But here's the problem. The original conversation didn't really cross that line. That's why the reaction felt so confusing to people watching. Because now it wasn't just about defending, it started to feel like overcompensating. Like the response was bigger than the situation required. And then things got even more chaotic. Because instead of staying focused, Ray J started bringing in other names, other situations, things that didn't clearly connect to what was originally said. That's when the internet really started asking questions. Wait, what is actually going on here? Because now it wasn't just heated, it was all over the place. And when that happens, people stop focusing on your message and start focusing on your behavior. which is exactly what happened. Clips of his rant started circulating everywhere. People weren't just watching, they were analyzing, breaking it down line by line, trying to figure out what exactly set him off like this. And the more they compared his reaction to the original clip, the more the gap became obvious. On one side, you had a lighthearted story. On the other side, you had a full-blown emotional response. And those two things just didn't line up. Now at this point, the situation could have gone quiet. It could have ended as just another internet moment. But that's not what happened. Because once the clip started gaining traction, it didn't take long for Camron and Mase to catch wind of the reaction. And when they did, they didn't back down. But interestingly, they didn't match his energy either. Camron came in calm. Direct, but calm. He made it clear that nothing they said was meant to disrespect anybody. From his perspective, this was just regular conversation, something they've done countless times without issues. Mase followed that same tone. Smooth, collected, not overly aggressive, but firm. Basically saying, this wasn't that serious. And that contrast? It made the situation stand out even more. Because now people weren't just comparing what was said. They were comparing how each side handled it. And that's when a third voice entered the picture. Shyne. Now this changed things. Because now it wasn't just a back and forth between two sides, it became a wider conversation. More pressure. More attention. More eyes on the situation. And once that happened, the internet fully locked in. At this point, it wasn't just drama anymore. It became a debate. People started picking sides. Some saying Ray J was right to defend his sister no matter what. Others saying he completely overreacted and turned something small into something huge. And then there were those in the middle, wondering if there's something behind the scenes that nobody knows about. Because one thing kept coming up again and again. This reaction feels deeper than what we're seeing. And honestly, that might be the most important part of this whole situation. Because sometimes, what looks like an overreaction on the surface is actually connected to something bigger underneath. But here's the thing. From the outside looking in, all people had to go off was what was said publicly. And based on that, most people agreed on one thing. The original story wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't messy. It wasn't even serious. So for it to turn into this level of chaos, that's what made it so fascinating to watch. Because now the focus shifted completely. It wasn't about Brandy anymore. It wasn't even about the story. It became about perception. About emotion. About how quickly things can escalate when something is taken the wrong way, or at least perceived differently. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more intense, that's when everything started building toward an even bigger moment. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more intense, that's when everything started shifting into overdrive. Because now, it wasn't just about clips going viral. It was about narratives being formed in real time. The conversation had officially left the original moment behind. This wasn't about a story anymore. This was about control, perception, and who the internet was going to believe. At this stage, people weren't just reacting, they were investigating. They were going back, replaying everything that Camron and Mase originally said, slowing it down, listening closely, trying to catch anything that could justify the level of response coming from Ray J. But no matter how many times they replayed it, they kept coming back with the same conclusion. There was no clear disrespect, no direct shot, no moment where things crossed a line. And that's when the tone of the conversation online started to change. At first, people were confused. Now, they were skeptical. Because if the clip didn't match the reaction, then what actually caused all of this? That question started getting louder and louder. And while that was happening, Ray J didn't exactly slow things down. If anything, he doubled down. Instead of stepping back and clarifying his stance, he leaned further into it, repeating the same energy, reinforcing the same message, making it clear that from his perspective, this wasn't a misunderstanding. To him, this was personal. And that's where things got tricky. Because when someone feels disrespected, even if others don't see it, their reaction becomes real to them. But at the same time, public perception doesn't work like that. The internet doesn't judge based on feelings. It judges based on what it can see, what it can hear, what it can verify. And in this case, what people saw didn't match the level of outrage. So now the narrative started flipping. Instead of asking, what did Cam and Mase do wrong? People started asking, why is Ray J reacting like this? That shift? It changed everything. Because now, the spotlight wasn't on the original story anymore. It was on Ray J himself. His tone, his delivery, his choice of words. And the more those clips circulated, the more people started pointing out how scattered everything felt. One moment he's talking about respect. The next moment he's making threats. Then suddenly he's bringing up unrelated situations, names, and energy that doesn't clearly connect back to the issue. And when that happens, it weakens the argument. Not because the emotion isn't real, but because the message gets lost. Meanwhile, on the other side, Camron and Mase stayed consistent. They didn't escalate. They didn't match the aggression. They stayed in their lane and repeated the same point. It wasn't that deep. And sometimes, that kind of response can be more powerful than yelling back, because it forces the audience to compare. Calm versus chaos. Controlled versus emotional. Measured versus unpredictable. And more often than not, people gravitate toward the side that feels more grounded. But then, just when things seemed like they might settle, another layer got added. Because now, discussions started popping up about history. Not just the story that was told, but the relationships behind it. People started asking, how well did they really know each other back then? Was there tension that never got addressed? Is this really about that story, or something else entirely? And that's when the situation turned from drama into speculation. Because now, the internet wasn't just reacting to facts. It was filling in gaps, creating theories, connecting dots that may or may not even exist. And once that starts, things can spiral fast. Some people began suggesting that maybe Ray J felt like the story made his sister look a certain way, even if that wasn't the intention. Others felt like it was more about respect, about boundaries, about not bringing up certain names, no matter how harmless the context seems. And then there were those who believed this had nothing to do with the story at all. That maybe something behind the scenes triggered this reaction. Something we haven't seen. Something we haven't heard. Because the truth is, not every reaction is about the moment you're watching. Sometimes, it's about everything that came before it. And if that's the case here, then this situation might be a lot deeper than it looks on the surface. But again, from a public standpoint, people can only judge what's in front of them. And what's in front of them is a clear contrast. On one side, a calm explanation. On the other, a heated response. And when those two things collide, the audience decides which one feels more believable. Now here's where things really lock in. Because at this point, it's no longer just about who's right or wrong. It's about impact. Who controlled the narrative? Who gained support? Who lost credibility? And depending on who you ask, the answers are different. Some still stand with Ray J, saying he did what any brother would do. Others feel like he let emotions take over and turned a small moment into something unnecessary. But almost everyone agrees on one thing. This didn't need to go this far. And yet, it did. Which brings us to the bigger picture. Because situations like this don't just happen in isolation. They're a reflection of how fast things move now. How quickly moments get clipped, shared, misinterpreted, and amplified. How something said in a relaxed, joking environment can turn into a headline within hours. And once it becomes a headline, it takes on a life of its own. At that point, it's no longer controlled by the people involved. It's controlled by the audience. And the audience? They don't just watch. They react. They judge. They pick sides. And sometimes, they push situations even further than they were ever meant to go. So now the question isn't just about what happened. It's about what happens next. Does this situation cool off? Do things get addressed privately? Or does it continue to escalate, with more responses, more reactions, and more attention? Because if there's one thing we've seen over and over again, it's that once something reaches this level of visibility, it rarely just disappears. And if both sides continue to stand on their positions, then this might not be the end. It might just be the beginning of something even bigger. So now it comes down to you. After seeing both sides, After hearing what was said and how it was responded to, what do you think? Did Ray J overreact? Or are Camron and Mase missing something deeper? Because one thing is clear. This wasn't just a moment. This turned into a situation. And the way it unfolded? That's exactly why the whole internet is watching right now. And the way it unfolded, that's exactly why the whole internet is watching right now. Because at this point, this isn't even just about a disagreement anymore. It's about how situations like this expose something bigger. The difference between intention and interpretation. On one side, you've got Camron and Mase, two people who clearly saw that moment as nothing more than a story. Something from the past. Something harmless. Something that didn't need to be taken seriously. And on the other side, you've got Ray J, who heard that same moment and felt something completely different. Not humor, not nostalgia, but disrespect. And whether people agree with him or not, that reaction changed everything. Because once emotion enters the situation at that level, there's no such thing as a small moment anymore. Everything becomes amplified. Every word gets reanalyzed. Every tone gets questioned. And every response becomes part of a bigger narrative. That's exactly what happened here. What started as a simple conversation turned into a public debate, then into a viral moment. And now, it's something people are still trying to fully understand. But here's where things get real. Because when you strip everything down, remove the noise, the reactions, the opinions, you're left with one core question. Did this situation need to go this far? And for most people watching, the answer is no. Not because emotions aren't valid. Not because defending family is wrong. But because the level of response didn't match the level of what was said. And that mismatch? That's what made this situation feel so chaotic. Now, at the same time, there's another side to this that can't be ignored. Because while the public only sees clips, only hears conversations, only reacts to what's visible, the people involved, they live the full story. They know the history. They understand the context that might never fully make it online. So it's possible that what looked like an overreaction was actually connected to something deeper, something personal, something unresolved.